So, what's a narcissist? What's a sociopath? What's a psychopath? What's someone with antisocial personality disorder? These terms are being thrown all around, and I'd like to provide some clarity on this. And I'm really curious why you are here. If you can just right up front comment below and let me know, are you a mental health professional looking for a differential diagnosis? Are you somebody in the criminal justice system? And I can talk about why it's relevant there. Are you simply curious? You've heard these terms, you're wondering, and you're like, okay, I'll watch a quick video on it. Or do you have somebody in your life who's very problematic for you and you're trying to figure this out? So if you're in that latter category, towards the end of this video, I'm going to address whether it matters or not to know the difference. And also just some other things that might be applicable for the regular person, not the professional. But I'm going to start really by addressing somebody who's in the mental health field who really wants to know what is the differential here in terms of how somebody's diagnosed. And obviously, for people who aren't licensed to diagnose, they shouldn't be diagnosing. So sometimes having sort of a sense of, ooh, this may be what I'm dealing with, sometimes that really can help you make decisions about what you can do and what you should do within the construct of the relationship. And so for just everyone to understand, the diagnosis for somebody who is a narcissist is narcissistic personality disorder. And there is no official diagnosis of sociopath or psychopath. It's actually called antisocial personality disorder. And antisocial personality disorder encompasses kind of what people think of as a sociopath and as a psychopath. But often when I have used that term with someone in the general population, they'll say to me, oh, but this person's not antisocial. So antisocial personality disorder has nothing to do with somebody not wanting to be around other people. It has nothing to do with whether you're an introvert or an extrovert. Nothing. Antisocial is used in the context that the person violates social norms in a way that's very either dangerous for themselves or others or quite destructive for society. So that's how that term antisocial is used, but I know it gets very confusing. So we have this umbrella term, let's say, of antisocial personality disorder and diagnoses of mental health disorders or personality disorders, and those are different. They're done based on something called the DSM-5, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, and the version that is currently being used is the DSM-5-TR. So I'm going to share officially how somebody is diagnosed, like what's required to achieve either the diagnosis of narcissistic personality disorder or antisocial personality disorder. And then I'll also make a comment about how psychopath and sociopath is seen within the criminal justice and mental health field. So personality disorders are seen as pervasive patterns of personality traits and behaviors that the person has had for a long time. I'm going to show here on the screen a slide that shows the difference between narcissistic and antisocial personality disorders. So narcissistic personality disorder has a pervasive pattern of grandiosity, need for admiration, and lack of empathy. For antisocial personality disorder, it's a pervasive pattern of disregard for and a violation of the rights of others. So you might see people who have an overlap, but those are fairly distinct kind of pervasive patterns, right? For narcissistic, there's a requirement that the pattern has been in evidence since early adulthood. And for antisocial personality disorder, the pattern's been in place since age 15. And the person exhibited behaviors that would have qualified for a diagnosis of conduct disorder prior to the age of 15. So conduct disorder, whole nother diagnosis, but it is only diagnosed in children. Obviously, not all people who come into the system to get diagnosed were diagnosed as kids, but there needs to be evidence that had they been diagnosed, they had behavior that would have qualified them for conduct disorder. Without that, there's not a diagnosis of antisocial personality disorder. And the other thing noted here on this page, personality disorders are only diagnosed in people over the age of 18. And then in addition to the criteria on the prior page, here is a slide that shows that somebody with narcissistic personality disorder will qualify for 5 of these 9 things. And for antisocial personality disorder, they have to qualify for at least 3 of the following 7. So you can see in looking at these that the ones for narcissistic personality disorder are very much focused on a grandiose sense of self, a preoccupation with them just being wonderful, brilliant, amazing people. They really require excessive admiration, extreme sense of entitlement. They lack empathy, and they're very arrogant and haughty. Okay, so those all would be the things they would have to have at least 5 of those 9 to qualify for that diagnosis. And the list under antisocial personality disorder is much more about violating laws and harming others. So you can see it's unlawful behaviors, deceitfulness, lying, conning others for personal profit or pleasure, impulsivity, and I'm going to summarize a handful of these points a little bit later in the video, which might be a little more helpful for the general population. They also have irritability and aggressiveness as indicated through physical fights, reckless disregard for their safety or the safety of others, consistent irresponsibility, like they don't pay their bills, they don't keep a job, really obvious behavioral manifestations of irresponsibility, and a lack of remorse. Now, you could look at this list and you could say, okay, well, narcissists and people with antisocial personality disorder have a lack of remorse, lack empathy, con others for personal pleasure or profit. And that's true, right? So making these differential diagnoses takes some time and some training, and it can be complicated. And sometimes people have more than one personality disorder, or sometimes they have like a little piece of this one, a little piece of that one, and they end up with a diagnosis of personality disorder not otherwise specified. So sort of like, yep, they got one, but we can't quite fit it into any one of these boxes. So I just want to say, I am a licensed psychotherapist, but I no longer provide psychotherapy. Instead, I'm doing this YouTube channel and trying to bring information around the world that's reliable, valid, helpful for people. And if you support what I'm doing here, I'd greatly appreciate if you subscribe and if you give me a like if you like this video. But I'm also sharing that just so you know I am licensed to diagnose. And in general, the people who are licensed to diagnose somebody could have a variety of different master's degrees or PhDs, or they could be medical doctors, and actually also nurses, psychiatric nurses in particular. But psychotherapists who could have a master's in marriage and family therapy, they could have a master's in social work. They receive training on how to diagnose, and they need to diagnose for insurance purposes. Other than that, pretty much I think I got everybody in there. People aren't licensed to diagnose, right? So just to be careful about how we throw around these terms and these diagnoses. And before I come back to just summarizing 4 points on kind of how to tell the difference that should be accessible to everybody watching this, I want to come back to the term sociopath and psychopath. Both terms have been around for a long time, and they don't, as I said before, have an official definition. And because a lot of people watching these videos are lay people, so just sort of what's in the general population as the definition of these words, I did look up the Merriam-Webster definitions, and they define a sociopath as a sociopathic individual or a psychopath. And then they define sociopathic, and I'm going to read this to you, as relating to or characterized by asocial or antisocial behavior or exhibiting antisocial personality disorder. So, Merriam-Webster dictionary, relatively accurate. I don't know how helpful it is, but they are pretty much equating these terms. And I'll read you their definition for psychopath. A mentally unstable person, especially a person having an egocentric and antisocial personality marked by a lack of remorse for one's actions, an absence of empathy for others, and often criminal tendencies. So I mentioned the criminal justice system before. So within the criminal justice system and the people who do forensic psychology, they do look a lot as whether somebody fits the psychopath definition, because those are the people with the highest recidivism rates, often the most violent crimes, and there is some thought that if they can really target how to differentiate, that is helpful, and then also perhaps helpful for providing treatment. So there is a screening tool that's very well accepted within that population in the criminal justice system and the forensic psychologists, and it's a screening tool used to differentiate somebody who is psychopathic and not just sociopathic. In general, a lack of affect, which means sort of a lack of expressions, would be one piece of it. Higher level of violence, and there's a number of other criteria. Not going to talk about it right now. If you're interested in that, leave a note, leave a comment, and I will come back at some point and address that. But I guess my basic point here is that neither of those terms are official diagnoses. So let me summarize this in terms of how this manifests or shows up in our lives. Sort of 4 different things I'm going to focus on. The first one is that in general, somebody with narcissism versus somebody with antisocial personality disorder will have a different view of how they want to be viewed. So somebody with narcissistic personality disorder is very focused on wanting to appear to be an upstanding citizen. They focus on how they look from the outside, what their community thinks about them, what people outside their home think about them, and what people outside the home think about everybody in their family. An example could be, a father who is abusive at home, but then, of course, is on the school board and involved in community affairs and helps the elderly neighbor, right? Now, somebody with antisocial personality disorder, if they care about those things, it is to achieve some other end. In general, they don't care too much. They don't obey the law. They have no regard for rules. And they usually present with consistent irresponsibility, quit their job often, don't pay their bills, don't care about whether they pay their bills or not. They might laugh about driving in a way that it was so dangerous somebody else got harmed. So that would be a little bit more on the spectrum of the antisocial personality disorder. The first thing is about how they want to be perceived, or whether they care about it. All right, number 2 is impulsivity. So again, if you remember that to get the diagnosis, you only have to have a certain number of the various points. Not all people with antisocial personality disorder are impulsive, but it's one of the criteria that it could be them. But in general, the narcissist is going to be very calculated, very careful, right? Because they care so much about how they're perceived. And the person with antisocial personality disorder might be incredibly impulsive. They might fail to plan ahead. They might just start a fight in the middle of anywhere, middle of a family gathering, outside at a bar where they're going to get arrested. Something got to them and boom, they just went there, right? Whereas the narcissist fights a little bit more strategically. And again, these now are general comments, not like this is the diagnosis. I also just want to say here, because with my other videos on related topics, people are like, well, I do that. Am I a, narcissist or sociopath? No, these are, right? It's the entire package. So there are a lot of people who have anger management problems, not narcissists, not sociopaths, not antisocial personality disorder. Fair number of people who are impulsive don't have a personality disorder. So just want to be clear. But if you're looking to differentiate, that might be something that helps with the differential. Another good example would be like a narcissist who thinks, they're going to break up with you, and they know they are. But they also know that you have been invited to an event where some important people might be, and they really want to go to that event. So they are going to stay with you, be charming, be wonderful until the event. And then if it seems like, they do have to stay in touch with you to stay in touch with the people they met, they might. But otherwise, okay, bye for now. Whereas somebody with antisocial personality, less likely to have the ability to contain their impulses and do that. So I think I said I wanted to summarize 4 different kind of areas to think about. So the third one is remorse. Now here I would say that in general, narcissistic personality disorder or antisocial personality disorder goes with a lack of remorse. Somebody with narcissistic personality disorder might say the right things. They may know what they need to say to get out of trouble, to get what they want. They may even believe they care, or they seem to. Hard to know for sure, but they may even believe that they are truly sorry. Whereas somebody with antisocial personality disorder will probably just say, yep, well, I'm entitled to do that. They might use the everybody does it. They might use other excuses or reasons, but basically they don't care and they don't always pretend to care. All right, the fourth sort of summary area is around the need to fit in or the need to be admired. So in general, somebody with antisocial personality disorder doesn't really care whether you like them or not. They don't really care what other people think about them. They almost enjoy being an outlier. They purposefully act recklessly and enjoy it. Whereas somebody with narcissistic personality disorder lives on other people's approval, almost like they can't live if they don't get the admiration and praise that they think they deserve. They're desperate to be admired and looked up to. And if it gets to a point in the relationship where you no longer are really looking up to them, they probably will lash out at you. Could be emotionally, verbally, physically, but you're likely to get a very angry response. Somebody with antisocial personality disorder, you might get an angry response whenever you don't do what they want or they don't get what they want. It usually is not tied to what you think of them or their reputation. So a number of things to keep in mind here, that if you are somebody licensed to diagnose, these diagnoses are tough and it takes some time to recognize and sort through, and usually consultation with someone else is very, very helpful in these situations. And if you're not licensed to diagnose, think through why it matters. Because if you have a toxic person in your life who is creating huge problems for you, it doesn't really matter what their diagnosis is. Sometimes it's helpful to hear about the patterns of behavior because you begin to really understand that this is about the other person, not about you. And that can be very freeing and helpful and really confirming your gut. But at the end of the day, if the person is toxic for you, what can you do about it? So the boundary course that I have has a whole section on toxic relationships. And I also talk in there how there are some people who are toxic. Like a lot of times, if somebody has a personality disorder, they're pretty toxic for almost everybody. But there's other people who end up being toxic for us. Maybe they don't even have a personality disorder, right? They might just be toxic because of the history we have, right? If you're married and you get divorced, often those relationships end up being pretty toxic. Doesn't mean the other person is personality disordered. And maybe it is specific to your history and what you've shared together that it became that toxic. But again, how does that matter? The key is for you to know that you get to validate your feelings. You get to protect yourself. You get to be in relationship with people who are supportive and energizing, right? People who truly value you. And the work for that is really working on your own self-esteem, your own sense of self, your own values, learning how to maybe even know what you're feeling and then to validate what you're feeling, knowing that you don't have to convince the other person that what they're doing is wrong in order to set a boundary with them. So this stuff takes some work. I don't know that quick YouTube videos or even longer ones like this ended up being are going to solve this for you. And the boundary program I have, it goes deep into why you might have experienced things that gave you a negative thought about yourself that are tied to why it's difficult to set boundaries or change relationships that are destructive, right? But it focuses on what you can do to live a more joyful life. So I really hope this video was helpful for you. Let me know what you think. I'm really interested to see the comments about why people are looking this up, because I got to tell you, over 60,000 people a month are searching what is a sociopath. Over 22,000 a month are searching what is a psychopath. Huge numbers of people are searching what's the difference between narcissism and being a sociopath or a psychopath. And I'm really curious why and what you feel you'll get out of understanding this better. That would be very helpful for me in knowing what videos to create in the future. So thank you for your help. I look forward to reading your comments. And if you liked this, do give it a like. Okay, see you next week.